All right, Diane, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So how does a Harvard-trained psychotherapist or Johns Hopkins-trained who you taught at Harvard, right?
Yes.
How does someone like you, high-level academic, get into something like ESP and telepathy?
Well, it actually began when I was a psychiatrist at Harvard, and I was consulting to the medical floors there. And they had this patient who wanted to sign out against medical advice. And she had told the staff that she was psychic and that she was seeing ghosts and she wanted to leave. And you can't leave a hospital against medical advice if you're mentally ill. And so I was called in to basically evaluate her and sign the paperwork and hold her against her will if she wasn't willing to stay. And when I went in to see her, I mean, she immediately told me that she was psychic and that she knew her results would come back normal, and that there were all these ghosts there and it was spooking her out and she wanted to leave. And I said, well, I imagine that, hospitals are kind of spooky places. If you see ghosts, this would be a place where they are. And I said, but, I'm really concerned about, the possibility you had a heart attack, and I'd love for you to stay. And so she then looked at me and she goes, you've got this really wonderful energy around you. She says, I'm getting a reading on you right now. Do you mind if I tell you what I see? And I said, oh, no, go ahead, sure. And she said, well, you're married to a chemist, and my husband was a biochemist in addition to being an MD. And then she said, and he's applying for a job in 2 different cities right now. And that very week, he was applying for a job in 2 different cities. And she had my attention now, and I said, oh, well, what can you tell me about that? And she said, well, in his heart of hearts, he wants to go to one of the cities, but you'll go to the other city. And I named up, she said, name some cities, and then I'll tell you which one it is. And I named off a bunch of cities, and then she said, oh, San Diego, that's where you're going to move, and you'll eventually leave psychiatry to write books, and then you'll have a daughter, and she just went on telling me about these things in the future. Well, it blew my mind because she was saying things that I knew to be true, and as time went on, all of the things that she predicted for my future came true. And as someone who went into this field with the intention of not just helping humanity, but with the intention of really understanding the brain and understanding consciousness and wanting to come up with a model for that, I knew that I would have to explain something like this if it was real. And so what I did was I started looking into, and back then it was really hard this was in the 90s, it was really hard to find information in parapsychology. But I did, and then in the mid-90s, things started getting declassified, and I went to a conference where Russell Targ spoke about his work that he did on remote viewing, and I said, wow, okay, there's a lot of evidence that I had no idea about. And I already knew a couple of things that made me open to this as an area of inquiry. And one thing I knew that physics from over a century ago had already shown us that what we think of as reality is really not the real reality, for example, that quantum physics, that all of that, and we can get into talking about that, but all of the things that we learned from quantum physics, or Einstein's work on time and how our sense of time is a linear, arrow moving forward only, and is an illusion. That there were physicists who said that the past, present, and future all coexist. And so I already knew about that, and then I already knew about a syndrome called Savant Syndrome, in which people know things that we don't really understand how they know them. Individuals who could do high-level mathematics, and yet they'd never been to school or taught arithmetic, or people who were musical savants who could perform on an instrument and they'd never had lessons. And I thought, well, somehow people are getting information that we don't understand. How did they get this information? And so anyway, so that's what sent me off on my journey. It was really this deep curiosity and this understanding that the brain is really, the brain is our means of constructing, making sense out of information, that we get from our senses. But it's all just a construct. What we think of as space and time is just a construct. And yet, if you look at what physics is telling us, it's telling us that there's more than just three dimensions, and that time is not linear in the way that we think it is.
And and you have a background in neuroscience?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Did you talk to anyone else at Harvard or in your department or any colleagues about this after you spoke with this lady? Did you have any conversations with people who may not have been exposed to this information about parapsychology and declassified documents and stuff like that?
No, not at the time. I spoke with my husband, who had trained at Johns Hopkins with me, only he was he was an internist and hematologist, oncologist, and biochemist. And he thought it was remarkable that that she told me what she did. But no, it was one of those things where I didn't know who I could talk with about it, because the problem is that within psychiatry, those things are considered to be evidence of somebody being mentally ill. If they say to you, "I'm telepathic," or "I see ghosts," or whatever, those are thought of as signs of some kind of psychosis, a condition like schizophrenia. And so I didn't really know what to say. And we did move. We did move within 6 months. We were in San Diego, and so at the time, I was just down the hall from John Mack.
Oh wow!
And John Mack was, he had started the Department of Psychiatry at Cambridge Hospital, where I was, where this happened. And I knew John because we were both really concerned about nuclear war, and so we were both among a group of physicians who were really interested in that matter. And so that's how I knew him. And and he had written, a book on Lawrence of Arabia, and he had gotten a Pulitzer Prize for that. And he was just a really very articulate, intelligent man. And I didn't know that he was somebody. It would have been really interesting to have had that conversation with him. I regret that I didn't. But
were you aware of the stuff that he was doing with people?
No.
At the time?
No, I wasn't. Mm-mm.
Because he was kicked out of Harvard, wasn't he?
Well, they tried to remove his tenure.
Uh-huh. And they ended up moving him off campus or something, because that was, I guess they thought that was not a good look. They had all kinds of meetings to get him removed from Harvard, and they didn't it was a combination of the craziness of studying people who thought they were abducted by aliens, combined with going on Oprah and going on all these huge talk shows and talking about it. And they thought that wasn't painting Harvard in a good light. Right.
Yeah. And all of that unfolded after I had already moved to San Diego. So I remember being, in my living room in San Diego and watching the news and seeing John and going, "Oh," and I had no idea that he was doing that kind of research. And but I had a lot of respect for him. And at the time when I first heard about his work, and I heard the criticism that neurologists were saying, well, what we think's happening during abduction is really sleep paralysis. And sleep paralysis is this condition in which your body, it's like a hybrid state between dreaming sleep and waking life. And so what I mean by that is during dreaming sleep, our body's paralyzed so that we don't act out our dreams. And what can happen is that sometimes people will be in this hybrid state, and it's more common to see in people who have a condition like narcolepsy, where their body's paralyzed and they see hallucinations, so imagery that, is kind of dreamlike, but they're awake. And so they're seeing those hallucinations within the context of their bedroom. And the only thing that can move is like their eyes. And so when I heard that was an explanation for what people thought were abductions, I thought, yeah, well, that makes sense. Maybe this is sleep paralysis, because I had been so trained and so immersed in that sort of, as a neuropsychiatrist, to really think of things in those kinds of terms. And it wasn't until, much later that I realized, no, there's a lot more here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild one of the things about this is it's like, to be able to go down one of these rabbit holes, you have to be very interdisciplinary, right? Like you can't just be, you can't have your blinders on in one area of study. You kind of have to have a peripheral knowledge of different things to be able to put these pieces of the puzzle together. That's why I was curious about your background in neuroscience and how like the neuroscience and like the anatomy of the brain and different regions of the brain correlate with your work in psychiatry and psychotherapy and that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So when I first went to medical school at Johns Hopkins, my intention was to be a neurosurgeon.
Oh.
And I actually did a lot of surgery.
Oh, really?
Yes, because that was my initial intention. Ben Carson was there. I knew Ben Carson. I mean, he may not remember me because I was just a medical student, but he was there as somebody who was a more senior resident, and I was there when he separated these twins whose brains were conjoined.
Oh, wow.
Siamese twins, yeah. And so I remember seeing them in the in the NICU, where you have infants that are have a medical condition. And so anyway, the reason why I wanted to become a neurosurgeon was that as a neuroscientist, I realized that what I was most interested in was human consciousness. And I didn't see how I was going to answer the kinds of questions I was interested in by studying, rats. But I also didn't like doing research on animals. And I thought, well, one of the most exciting branches of research at the time was being done by neurosurgeons who would, while somebody is having their brain operated on, mm-hmm. They can be awake,
right? Because
you don't have pain receptors. And so they would stimulate different parts of the brain to see what functionality it had before cutting, because they would try to, if you're dealing with a tumor, you want to remove all of the tumor with enough margins, but you also want to preserve functionality. So you're between those two constraints. Mm-hmm. And so it's an opportunity to be mapping things out. And I had done research as an undergraduate in neuroscience, where I was making microelectrodes, and I was inserting out of glass, and I was inserting them into a crayfish axon, and recording the action potential of the crayfish axon, in a petri dish, mm-hmm. and then putting different things in there, like maybe something that would affect the flow of ions like calcium, et cetera, and then seeing what influence it had on the action potential. So I already knew about, working with oscilloscopes and working, with that aspect of things. I thought, wow, to be able to be inserting tiny electrodes into somebody's brain and stimulating it and measuring it, and then also getting them to tell you what they're experiencing, I thought, that's really exciting. And so that was my initial intention. But when I went to Johns Hopkins and did my psychiatry rotation, I fell in love with psychiatry because the chairman of our department, Paul McHugh, was a neurologist first, and then he became a psychiatrist. And the way that he ran the psychiatry department was really basically behavioral neurology and neuropsychiatry. And so it was really focused on kind of trying to understand the neural correlates of these phenomena, like, whether you're talking about, cognition or, memory, those sorts of things.
For some reason, most dress shirts make you have to choose between looking good and feeling comfortable. Mizzen & Main is the first brand I've worn that does both without having to iron, steam, or dry clean. It's stretchy, it's super soft, and it's my favorite to wear on golf days because it keeps me cool under that hot Florida sun. Mizzen & Main makes classic menswear using performance fabrics, so looking put together doesn't feel like a chore. They actually invented the performance fabric dress shirt over 10 years ago, and they've been refining it ever since. Their shirts and pants look polished, but they're stretchy, lightweight, moisture-wicking, wrinkle-resistant, and completely machine washable. No iron, no dry cleaner, just throw it on and go. Whether you're in the office, traveling, golfing up a sweat, you feel the difference immediately. Professional style that flexes with you. Mizzen & Main is a veteran-led company that gives back, offering year-round military discounts and supporting veteran organizations. And right now, Mizzen & Main is offering our listeners 20% off your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com using the promo code Danny20. That's Mizzen spelled M-I-Z-Z-E-N and Main, MAIN.com. Promo code DANNY20 for 20% off. Mizzenandmain.com, promo code Danny20. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen & Main stores in select states.
Have you heard of the gentleman, I think his name's Henry Molaison? He was he's quoted to be like the most studied man in brain science. I read about it in a book called Moonwalking with Einstein, all about memory. And he was a guy who, when he was in his 20s, he was having really bad epileptic seizures all the time. So they did some sort of lobotomy on him. And when they got done with the surgery, he had no more short-term memory. Like every day was a new day. All he had was like his old memories from from his early life. And here he is, Henry Molaison. What does it say? It says, in an attempt to cure his epilepsy, although the surgery was partially successful in controlling his epilepsy, a severe side effect was that he became unable to form new memories. His unique case also helped define ethical standards of neurological research, emphasizing the need for patient consent and consideration of long-term impacts of medical interventions, which is crazy that, I don't think we still don't know like which parts of the brain hold long-term, short-term. It seems like it might be somehow partitioned off in multiple different parts of the brain memory.
Yeah. Well, just a correction here. It wasn't a frontal lobotomy that he had.
Okay.
That's a different part of the brain. What he had was a bilateral temporal lobectomy.
Okay.
So and most I'd say a high percentage of epilepsy is in the temporal lobes. The temporal lobes are on the sides here.
Right.
And so when you're coming through the birth canal, that's an area that can get scarred or damaged. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so it's interesting. They did a bilateral on him. Wow.
Yeah, this was in the 50s, I believe.
Yeah, before we knew what we know today.
Mm-hmm.
So the hippocampus is involved in laying down memory. Okay, and it's the oldest. It's called the archaeocortex. In other words, it's an older cortex than what we think of as the cortex, and the hippocampus is also involved in navigation. Remember several years back when people received the Nobel Prize for discovering sort of the brain's GPS?
No, I don't remember that.
And I wrote about it in my book, The ESP Enigma, and before they got the Nobel Prize for it. Yeah, we have in the hippocampus and in areas adjacent to the hippocampus, like the entorhinal cortex, we have these cells that some of the cells are involved in laying out a grid, which is like a map of physical space. And those cells will start to fire, become active when, say, we are in a certain location. So that you have maybe a map in your mind of your neighborhood. Okay. And there are cells that are associated with different parts of that map that will start becoming active when you're in that area.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then there are also cells that that are involved in like your orientation of what way your head is, facing. So they're head position cells. And as I said, there's like these grid cells and place cells. And so it really is an internal mapping system. But the hippocampus is also involved in laying down memory. And it's particularly active in dreaming sleep. It's the source of most of the theta activity, which is theta is that activity that is at the lower end of the Schumann frequencies, so around 7 hertz. Okay, that's, theta is between 4 and 8 hertz. And 7 hertz, that 7 hertz activity has been associated with things like remote viewing and various psychic abilities. Like there was this...
Here, pull them off and then put them back on.
Yeah.
You don't want you to look like you're being electrocuted. There you go.
So like when they did studies on Ingo Swann, who was one of the most famous remote viewers, they saw this very
also a Scientologist. my one of my buddies got me that as a funny joke because this area is synonymous with Scientology. So
is it?
He got me an e-meter as a gift, so we put it up here as a fun prop.
Oh, that's fun. I've never seen one before.
Yeah. So the idea is you hold on to these things and they go into auditing sessions, and you hold one of these in each hand. And then they ask you questions about your life. Like they do a deep dive psychological review of your life, and you talk about all the negative things that have ever happened to you, your deepest, darkest secrets. So this thing bounces around, and it somehow removes your body thetans, which are like aliens that live inside you.
Oh, I see. Okay, there you go. It's a technological exorcism.
Yes, exactly. And all of the top remote viewers were Scientologists.
Yeah, I know a lot of them were. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So he had this really very unusual 7 hertz activity in his, I believe it was in his occipital lobe, which, when he was remote viewing, and the occipital lobe is the visual cortex. So there's this association between that sort of frequency, the theta frequency, and dreaming and psychic abilities. And the main source of the theta is the hippocampus. And then the parahippocampal area there was another imaging study that showed that area of the brain would become really very active during these kind of, whether it's remote viewing or, some other kind of, or telepathy. There was research that had shown that area would become more active. And so I'm very interested in it because it made me wonder whether or not the hippocampus could be involved in not just navigating physical space, but actually navigating mental space. If you think of how our memories organized, they're
right.
And I really think that they're actually organized in a field, rather than being organized in the brain. That the brain is our access to that,
like an antenna.
Yeah, it's sort of like an antenna, but it's more than just an antenna. Yeah. I think of it as being, the way I think of the brain is I think of it as being like our computer, okay, in terms of, it's got computational aspects, but it also, think of it as also having an ability to help us surf the net, surf the cloud, surf the informational field.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there was research that was shown by Lashley, who was doing he was looking at memory, and he was trying to find where's memory, encoded, and so he was removing different parts of a rat's brain.
Yeah.
And what he found was that it wasn't the location of where he removed brain tissue that determined loss of memory. It was more the amount of brain tissue you took away, and so
interesting. And
so he really he believed that there was sort of some kind of holographic component to it, but getting back to the hippocampus and memory, though, it is true that the hippocampus plays a role in converting short-term memory into long-term memory. And so the hippocampus is extremely metabolically active. It has very high need for oxygen, for example. Anything that's metabolically active needs more oxygen. And so if somebody has something happen that interferes with oxygen, so for example, carbon monoxide poisoning, which affects the ability of blood to, give you, or cyanide poisoning, it affects the ability of blood to carry oxygen and then deliver it where it's needed. Well, people who've survived carbon monoxide poisoning, they trashed their hippocampus. And I remember seeing patients like this, or people who had suffocated and then been brought back to life from some other source of, like drowning or some other source of suffocation. They oftentimes they cannot form new memories, and it's because their hippocampi have been wiped out. And I've had I've had patients like that, and it really is like every single day. I had this one woman her husband tried to kill her, and he tried to kill her by choking her, and she survived it. And he ended up in one psych ward because at Hopkins because of having been murderous, and she ended up under my care. And what happened is that when he got out of the psych hospital, he killed himself because he
in prison or something.
Well, he didn't go to prison. He didn't go to prison. No, he was considered mentally ill. And he did not go to prison. I know, it's hard to believe, isn't it? But anyway, he did not go to prison. He was out on some kind of bail, having been, evaluated psychiatrically. But anyway, but he killed himself.
Right.
And every day when I'd go in to see this woman, she'd ask me why her husband wasn't coming to visit her. And I would have to tell her that he's no longer alive. And she would cry as though she was hearing the information for the first time, each time. And after a while, I just thought, I'm not going to put this woman through this anymore. The reason why I tell that story is because if there's anything you're going to remember, it's going to be something like that your husband's no longer alive, and that you've grieved them and cried over it.
And every day you're putting her through the most psychological pain she could imagine.
And so I realized it's not, I'm not going to do that.
So what did you start telling her?
I just said, I don't know. You haven't heard from him. She said, no, I haven't heard from him. When's he coming? I said, I don't know when he's coming. And I just kind of, because I figured that was better to just kind of...
Sure, yeah, totally.
Than put her through that.
And every day was the same. She completely it was a new day. She didn't remember the day before.
Yeah, it was a new day, yeah.
This week, Prize Picks has a special max discount for the big game, live in the app right now. Drake May just needs one passing yard for this max discount to win. Just add another player in your lineup, and if your pick hits, you're cashing, baby. Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. It's simple. You open the app, pick more or less on your player projections, build a lineup in under a minute, and suddenly the game is way more fun to watch. No draft, no season-long commitments, just daily fantasy when you want it. And yes, Prize Picks is available in all 50 states, which is great even if you're traveling. And there's 2 features I'm loving right now. First, the new social feed. You can find your community, follow Prize Picks partners like us, and even copy lineups from people who are dialed in with a single click. Or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And secondly, early payouts. You now have the option to cash out before the game even ends. That kind of flexibility makes a big difference during the playoffs and during the big game. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code DANNY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code DANNY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right.
How long was she unconscious for when he choked her? And how long did she lose oxygen? Do you know?
I don't really know the details of it. I just know that what I told you of the story.
I'm curious if there's any correlation with effects to the hippocampus with people who are like free divers who do long period breath holds, or even like surfers who hold their breath a lot when they're surfing and like wiping out duck diving waves and stuff like that. People who habitually practice breath holds. I wonder if there would be any negative effect to the brain or the hippocampus.
Yeah, I don't know, because if what you're doing is you're conditioning yourself towards something, then that's not an acute process. And it's the acute process where your system hasn't had a chance to adapt. That's
right, I see.
The most problematic, just like people who live at, high altitudes. I mean, the body compensates. They have higher hematocrits, which is the number of red blood cells that you have. The concentration.
Yeah.
So there's these. So people that are conditioning themselves like that, I doubt that they're depriving their brain of that much oxygen.
Interesting anecdote. I have a friend who's been on this podcast before who is a metabolic scientist who did a study for the Navy for Navy divers who were getting oxygen toxicity seizures from the rebreathers. So when the Navy divers, they go underwater, they have to be stealth. There can't be any bubbles. So they use these special tanks that are rebreathers, and they were getting toxicity seizures from it. And what he was able to figure out with his studies is that putting these people in ketosis or giving them exogenous ketones was wiping out the seizures. And what they're doing now, what they've started doing is implementing that into like epilepsy patients, people who have epilepsy, and putting them on a strict ketogenic diet. And a very high percentage of them are experiencing like little to no epileptic seizures anymore.
But I was taught that back when I was in my training 40 years ago. We already knew that. We've known that for a long time.
No way. Oh, okay. I thought this was more recent.
Well, there's a lot of things that are rediscoveries of things that we knew, a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's
so something about glycogen versus ketones. The brain prefers to be in a ketogenic state and burning ketones versus glycogen, and it's some weird way that makes the brain more optimal at function at a higher level.
Well, the brain can either run on glucose, which is
glucose,
or it can run on ketones. And ideally, the brain is actually running on both. And so that's one of the reasons why intermittent fasting has become very popular, where people will go 15 hours or so in between meals, so that you give yourself a long enough fast that you kick in that ketogenesis, but you're not like a diabetic who's in ketosis all the time. So that's a healthier way of being, is to have this kind of, you've got the glucose is the like immediate sort of thing, but then you want to be able to turn on the ketone generation for when you're not eating.
And when you're in a fasted ketogenic state, you are
you're sharper, you're quicker, you're faster to respond to stuff, and it just extrapolates out into nature. Like if a lion or a cheetah, oftentimes they go many days between meals because they can't catch prey. So if they have gone 5 days without catching anything, their body has to be more dialed in, more optimal, more quicker, sharper. So that makes sense. At what point did you make the connection between this ESP telepathy stuff and folks with autism?
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, I really was interested in Savant Syndrome and these case reports of people who knew things that we just like how do they know that and I had read Oliver Sacks' book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat back in 1986. I met Oliver Sacks back then.
Really?
He came to Johns Hopkins and I attended his lecture, and then we had a private sort of. I was on the social and cultural affairs committee as a student, and so I got to meet a lot of really interesting people. And I read his book before he came, and I was just so fascinated by these autistic twins who had been admitted to this institution back in the 60s who could. One of the games they played was to spit out consecutive prime numbers. And they were doing it in 6 digits. And so one of them would say, some 6-digit number, and then the other one would say the next one. And then they would just go back and forth doing consecutive 6-digit prime numbers. And Oliver Sacks came in one day having looked at a prime number table, and he said an 8-digit prime number, and then they looked at one another and like, oh, okay. And then they switched to doing 8-digit prime numbers.
Whoa.
And then he tested them on 12 digits, and they were accurately doing 12-digit prime numbers. And they even gave 20-digit prime numbers, but back then in the 60s, computers couldn't calculate 20-digit prime numbers. And so Sacks was only able to validate it to 12. And they also could do calendar calculation, being able to tell you could give them for thousands of years, forwards and backwards, you could give them a date, and they would tell you what day of the week it was.
How old are these guys?
Oh, they were, at the time he studied them, I think that they were in their like late teens, early 20s. But the thing is that they couldn't do simple arithmetic. And what they said was they just saw the answers. They just saw the answers, and they saw the answers out here in physical space, just like,
Floating in space?
Yeah, just floating in space, like a hallucination. And just like, who hallucinates, 12 and 20-digit prime numbers? And so I thought that's really fascinating. And then, then I learned about Daniel Tammet, who is an autistic savant, who he's won the pi contest. The pi contest, as in pi, the mathematical constant, which is 3.14, blah 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 blah. That's the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, and he can recite it to over 22,000 digits effortlessly, and he says he never memorized it. He just sees it out here in what we think of as physical space. And so when in 5 hours he's just visualizing the numbers as complex landscapes with colors and shapes, and I thought that's very similar. And so it really got me to thinking about the nature of reality and where information, is where is information stored? But
I remember seeing a documentary on this guy.
Yeah, but the other thing is that Savant Syndrome is found predominantly in 2 populations. And one population is individuals who are autistic, and the other population is people who are blind, but blind congenitally. And so those are both conditions in which there's something different about the wiring of their brain, where there's something that there are things that they can't do, like in blind, people, obviously it's that they can't see, but with autistic people, there's certain things that they struggle to do. I think that like these autistic individuals who were institutionalized that Sachs studied, I think they couldn't even tie their shoes or something, just a lot of basic things. And yet their brain's somehow wired that they can do, these kinds of things that we don't really have good algorithms for. They can do these things faster than a mathematician even who's given an algorithm. And so it's not that they are deriving the answers or calculating them. It's perceptual, and it's hard to wrap your head around. But to me, that was like a clue that if I want to sort of crack the code for consciousness, the way to do so is to study these autistic savants who can reliably demonstrate these abilities that we would consider just as impossible if it wasn't for the fact that they're so reliably demonstrated and have been demonstrated by more than one individual. And so that's why I started studying autistic savants. And then I've been studying autism since 1987.
Oh, really?
So after I met Oliver Sacks, I won a fellowship to go to the Institute of London the Institute of Psychiatry in London and work with Michael Rutter, who was knighted for his work on autism afterwards. But because he was the world expert on autism at the time. And
really?
Yes. And I was fascinated by neurodevelopmental conditions as a way of trying to understand this relationship between the brain and consciousness. So instead of going into neurosurgery, where a lot of your time as a neurosurgeon isn't spent doing the really interesting stuff, and I decided what I want my bread and butter work to be is neuropsychiatry, where I'm studying neurodevelopmental disorders and neurodegenerative disorders, where something goes on such that people either never acquire an ability, or they kind of acquire it in a quirky way, or they had an ability and they lose it, and then finding the correlations between, what their symptoms, their behaviors are, and their testing on cognitive tests with what we can learn from neuroimaging about their brain function. So that's why I shifted to neuropsychiatry from neurosurgery, but it was always with the same aim. And so I went over there to study these kids with him. And so there were very few people who've been in the field as long as I have. And I realized when I started studying these autistic savants, I realized that they had some abilities that really, sounded a lot like ESP. And I thought, well, accessing information that we don't understand how you access it, why do we accept these things like, generating, prime numbers, and musical talent for somebody who's never been trained. Why do we call that a savant skill? And yet if they can tell you things before they happen, or if they can, see things that are, like something like clairvoyance or remote viewing, if they can do that, it to me, it just is all people accessing information that we don't understand how they're doing it. And so there are some things that I feel that we tend to segment away from one another, and we lose information by treating them as though they're different. And then there's other things that we tend to lump together that I wouldn't lump together. Like I wouldn't have created autism spectrum disorder, because that's really multiple different conditions all lumped under one label. and that confuses things. But to me, I think it actually brings more clarity if we just look at a lot of these phenomena that are like accessing non-local information as being really probably something that it's telling us that our way of conceptualizing information and how the brain accesses it is it's fundamentally flawed within the materialist model. Because I as a neuroscientist, I studied that model. I have a book. Eric Kandel. He did work on this. On the snail, and and a lot of and I have an autographed book of his. So I was like, I was a, dyed in the wool, neuroscientist. And what I knew is neuroscience has a really incomplete model. There's so many things that we've accepted an explanation, it's accepted something as an explanation that really doesn't explain everything. Yeah. And it's so incomplete. And then we're ignoring all of these phenomena that don't fit into it. And so that's that's what led to my writing my book, The ESP Enigma, was my recognition that there's all this data that shows that these things are possible, and why are we saying it's impossible?
Well, two things. The one interesting thing to point out is there's this. I believe he's a neurosurgeon, Steve. I've talked about this guy many times, but I got to get his name right. I think it's Eddie Yang at Stanford. Came out and said that he was talking to I think it was Andrew Huberman on a podcast. He's friends with Andrew Huberman. He said that like 90% of all of the literature, all of the medical literature in textbooks when you're going studying for your PhD in like neuroscience or neurosurgery, whatever it is outdated or wrong, which was crazy coming out of the mouth of a guy like that. And it's just like, just goes to show you that just because you spend your life studying something and reading all this old literature, and it's like it's very rigid, and not many people kind of like step outside of that framework, which is kind of scary. Another thing is a fundamental problem with studying this stuff like ESP and clairvoyance and all this is you can't test it with the scientific method, right?
Well, I don't know why you say you can't test it with a scientific method.
Because it doesn't pass scientific method muster, right? It's not repeatable. You can't measure it. You can't weigh it. It seems to be very anecdotal.
No, there's a lot of research where they're using scientific methodology to study it. The telepathy tapes is full of a lot of anecdotes, and some of the most
Eddie Chang, I'm sorry.
Eddie Chang,
neuroscientist at UC. I thought it was Stanford. Okay.
Yeah, well, what he's saying there, 50%. Well, what's interesting is
UCSF Stanford?
No, UCSF is University of California, San Francisco.
Got it. Okay.
But
shows how much I know about college. I didn't make it. I barely made it out of high school.
Well, when I was in medical school at Johns Hopkins, we were told while we were there in my first year, half of what we're going to teach you is going to be obsolete by the time you finish your career, and it's your job to contribute to making it obsolete. Yeah, and so my having gone there at Johns Hopkins, the main reason why I went there is that I knew that they wanted to be on the cutting edge. And they a high percentage of the people who go to medical school there stay on in academia, and 10% of my class were people that were also in the MD PhD program, as was my husband. And initially, I was going to be in the MD PhD program, but I decided not to do the PhD component of it. But it was, very, 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 very academic, but with the idea of really, you're allowed to question. Okay.
Right.
You were, at least back then. I can't say how things are nowadays, but I know at the time that I was in training, you were encouraged to try to, as I said, figure out, what is it that is incorrect. And at the time that I went into neuroscience, neuroscience wasn't even a major. I crafted my own major, and similarly, when I did all of my training in psychiatry, it was before Prozac. And so we didn't have a fraction of the psychotropic drugs that are available nowadays to psychiatrists. And so what I saw happen, so at the time I was training in psychiatry, it was still a fairly new field to be entering into a biological approach to psychiatry. When I went to Harvard, when I first arrived at Harvard on faculty, everybody there was talking about where to buy an analytical couch, because they were still heavily psychoanalytic in their orientation, as was John Mack.
An analytical couch?
Yeah.
What is that? Do you know what that is?
It's like those Victorian fainting couches.
Oh, yes. The fainting couches. Okay.
Is it like a therapist couch?
Yes.
I know what a fainting couch is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are analytic. And so you would have, in psychoanalysis, you would have the patient lay down on the couch facing the ceiling, because it was, and then you as the analyst would be sitting there with your pad of paper while they're talking, and it was that it would reduce their inhibitions to tell you things that were embarrassing. They're not looking you eye to eye.
Right.
And you encourage the person to free associate. Just say whatever comes to your mind. Don't worry about any judgment or this or that, And so that was the that's how psychiatry was, under the influence of Freud, and the psychoanalytic tradition was very, very strong. Where I went to medical school and then also did my training in psychiatry at Johns Hopkins was different from that from day one, because at the time that the psychiatry department was created in either the late 1800s or the early 1900s at Johns Hopkins, the psychiatrist they brought in was a contemporary of Freud's named Adolf Meyer. And Meyer's approach was not analytical. His approach to psychiatry was biological, psychological, sociological. And so this biopsychosocial psychiatry, meaning that when someone came to you and let's say they complained of being, apathetic and not wanting to live anymore, okay, and they, just, all of these different symptoms that we would call the syndrome depression. Well, in my training, we would have to figure out what was the reason why, and so is it something that is biological? So, for example, people can have depression because they're deficient in vitamin B12. Or they can have depression because they have a thyroid condition.
Right. We're walking chemical bags.
Yeah. And so there are all these things that can bring that about, and that's what you want to correct, Or it could be that it's psychological. It could be, that it's, that their mother used to, abuse them as a kid, and now they're married to a woman that abuses them the same way, and they're trapped and they don't know what to do, and they kind of shut down because there's all of these, things that have to do with their psychology. Or it could be something sociological, like you're living in, a totalitarian state, and, in society, and you're a persecuted minority, and,
Right.
and it's really more at that level that things are problematic. And so,
Or in like inner cities of America too, people who grow up in like ghettos that are surrounded by crime. Everyone they know is involved in crime, and
yeah, exactly. And so what is the cause of this individual's whatever symptoms they have?
Yeah.
And so that's how I was trained, and that's what I wouldn't have gone into psychiatry if it was just here's a drug to manage the symptoms or whatever. I loved being like a detective trying to figure out, what creates that, and then getting at the root of the problem and addressing it there. And so that's how I was trained to practice psychiatry. And there are people who today as psychiatrists still practice that way. And, that's what we call integrative psychiatry or, functional medicine. But where you're still looking for, what is the root, the root cause of this syndrome?
it's the mushroom everyone's heard of before, the one with the bright red cap and the little white spots, the one you see in Mario and your favorite Christmas fairy tales. It's not psilocybin and it's not a psychedelic. It's Amanita muscaria. It's legal and it provides stress relief like I've never experienced before. I would have never touched this stuff if it wasn't for Amantara, because we see sketchy gas station products all the time causing harm, and it damages our perception of the real thing. Amantara is the complete opposite. They are the largest Amanita supplier in the US, totally legal, ethically sourced, lab tested, and they work directly with foraging families around the world. This isn't a side hustle or a scam. It's a serious operation. Real Amanita tastes natural like a tea, not like an artificial chemical. And the experience feels clean with no weird edge or synthetic vibe. I take a couple of these when I get home after work, and it really does make a house full of screaming toddlers far more bearable. It feels like I have infinite patience. If you can imagine yourself in a super stressful environment and not feeling triggered, that's what Amanita does for me. If you're curious about Amanita muscaria, don't go grab something random off the counter. Use the legitimate and trusted professionals. Amantara's 500 milligram capsules and gummies are consistent and beginner friendly. 2 to 3 capsules is a great starting point. Check out the gentle, relaxing effects of Amanita muscaria. Go to amantara.com/go/DJ and use the code DJ22 for 22% off your first order. Again, that's Amantara, AMENTARA.com/go/DJ and use the code DJ22 for 22% off your first order. Yeah, when I, to clarify what I meant about the scientific, like not passing the scientific method muster, is that like, when I say like you can't measure it, like I have this thing, I have a problem, and I think a lot of people also share, is that I'm very bad at measuring probabilities. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, the other day, I'm walking through my kitchen and I was walking up to my wife, not even thinking. And I was like, do you want to get tacos? And she goes, get out of my head. I just had that thought in my head. And I was like, that was weird. That was some sort of weird telepathy thing. Like, it wasn't even dinner time. It wasn't even like the thought. That was not a normal thought for that time of day. And another time I've had people like call me that I haven't thought about or talked to in years, right? Where it's like, whoa, why are you calling me? And a lot of people talk about this. But how many times have you thought about a person that you haven't thought about in a long time and they didn't call you? You don't categorize that into a meaningful memory, right? When they do call you, that's when you attribute meaning to it. And that's when you memorize it and you want to talk about it. And it's like, wow, this is something divine, you know? So when you're measuring this with lots of people, like how many people can you put into a room and repeat the same experiment with How do you prove it wrong? Can you? Is it possible to prove wrong? Is it possible to disprove this stuff?
Is it possible to disprove it? Well,
Right.
it's. Boy, you've asked so you brought up several things. I
Sorry.
have to think about where
My
to even
stream of
start.
consciousness is highly uneditorialized.
Yeah. So, well, let me just make a few comments.
Sure.
So, first of all, you have a lot of parapsychology research has been of the order of, let's say we've got Zener cards, and we've got, 5 Zener cards, and the chances of you, whether it's precog or it's telepathy or whatever the experiment is that you're using those Zener cards for, it's a chance of, 1 out of 5, or 20%, that, it's going to be one of the, if I say it's the card that looks like a cross, it's like, it's, the chances of that are, 1 out of 5, 20%, right? And so a lot of the research has been done on, using a system like that, using large numbers of people, large numbers of trials. And then what they get is like, they get a percentage, like where 25%, say it's 4 cards, 25% is just random chance, and what they get is 32%. And it ends up with these astronomical statistics that it has to be, something more than just chance. And that's there are meta-analyses, that look at, thousands of trials. And that's one of the things that Dean Radin frequently will quote. And I saw that a lot of parapsychology is done that way. And I thought, that's not the way I would go about it. The way that I would go, because it's not that convincing. Even though, so the p-value is, amazing.
Right.
That's not gonna change perception.
Right.
And so that's why I thought, well, if anybody could do it to the degree that would give you extraordinary evidence, it would be somebody who is an autistic savant. That was a decision that I made over 20 years ago and predicted it. Because of what I know about how their brain works. And I can get into that more in a little bit. But and so with the autistics, individuals that I've worked with, I mean, they get, 95, 97% accuracy on things that, chance might be,
Like what, for example? Like, how does it work? Like, give me an example of like one exercise that they would get that high level accuracy on.
Oh, well, there was this girl named Haley that I did 6 hours worth of research on, and she had that kind of accuracy. And I did everything from using a random number generator to generate 6-digit random numbers. Okay. So, and just doing, I did, like, there was one run where it was like 167, digits, and she only missed 7. No, it was 172, and she only missed 7. She got 165 of those right.
Wow.
Now, and it's just like, okay, something's going on here, And
how many people were in the room?
So it was just Haley and the therapist that she was working with, and then the cameraman and I were in a separate room with camera feeds, and we had cameras on either side, on the ceiling, in front and behind, and then we had a visual barrier between the therapist and Haley, and so it was pretty phenomenal. I mean, and then, and she could do this with 2 separate therapists. And how I met Haley was that her father knew Daryl Treffert and knew about mathematical savants and thought that his daughter was a mathematical savant because she was able to do like all of these amazing mathematical equations, and yet she really hadn't been trained how to do it. And he already knew about, Savant Syndrome, and he thought, oh, well, she's a mathematical savant. And then one day when the therapist was working with her, the therapist's calculator died on her, and she had to switch calculators. And the calculator wasn't within eyesight of Haley, and the calculator died on her, and she switched calculators. And the new calculator, until she reset it actually gave the answer in logarithmic notation, which is going to be a different set of numbers.
Wow.
And so Haley immediately typed the answer in logarithmic notation. It had never done that before. And the therapist's like, well, wait a minute. How'd you know that was in logarithmic notation? And Haley typed, I see the numerators and denominators in your head. And then the therapist said, what? You can read my mind? And she goes, yes. And then she goes, well, okay, if that's the case, then what am I thinking of right now? And she was thinking of that purple dinosaur Barney, and she typed Barney. And then she goes, well, what's the name of my landlord? And then she typed Helmet, and that was the name of her landlord. And she was like, holy cow, and at first she thought she was losing her mind. And she was afraid to tell the parents. And so then eventually she did. In the meantime, another therapist that was coming into the home to do work with Haley, she noticed that Haley would do the same. You know how some of us will transpose letters, and we always do that kind of spelling mistake, and and as soon as you see it, it's wrong. And you want to correct it.
Right. Like I after E or something like that.
Yeah, that kind of, or people with dyslexia will, will do that. And so she would do that kind of a thing. And she would see that Haley would do the same things that she would do. And she's just like, oh, that's funny. You make the same mistakes as me,
Wow.
And she just said, it's funny. It's like you're tapping into my mind, And Haley said, "I am," And she says, "Well, then, if that's so, how do you say 'I love you' in German?" Because this woman was fluent in German as well, and then she types out. Haley had never been exposed to German, and she types out the German for "I love you," and. So anyway, it was after those accounts, and Daryl Treffert knew that I. After having come back from India and having worked with these savants over there, that I was interested in pursuing questions of telepathy. And so I was contacted, and I went out there and I did the studies, in as controlled of a fashion as I could.
Yeah.
And Daryl Treffert's no longer alive, but he was convinced. He publicly went on record saying that he thought that telepathy was a real thing, that it was a savant skill. He was on the same page as me, that really that there's something going on here.
Has it ever been done where one of the children was in a completely opposite part of the house or a different part of the room where there's no visual connection, no line of sight or anything like that, where they're able to read the mind or communicate what the other person's saying or thinking?
No, not really in the way that I would like to see it done. I mean,
Right.
There was there's been studies where, how you have these houses where you have a contiguous dining room and living room, and so you've got a huge separation, a separation that's as big as your studio here, so easily, 20, 25 feet separation. Right. Okay, but you still have some visibility between, the person, the mother and child.
Sure.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Continue. Yeah, so that's been one of the things that I recognize that a lot of skeptics, would like to see them in separate rooms, and I would like to see that as well. It's easier said than done because autistic children are so they're very they're OCD. They like things to be the same. They don't like changes to their routine. they're really extremely they get dysregulated very, very easily, emotionally dysregulated, and so they just it's really hard to just kind of do that and have them calm and have all of these people there with cameras and
one of the other things that people say is that if you have someone there who is skeptical, it automatically like ruins the trick, right? Like they can't do it because there's the energy of somebody who doesn't believe could kind of ruin it, right?
Well, it's okay for somebody if they're an open-minded skeptic.
Okay.
So like you would qualify as that.
Right.
You're open-minded. You've got some skepticism, but you're not there as somebody whose job it is to, kind of where you're convinced that it's got to be a scam, and your job is to figure out how are they scamming us.
Right, totally.
Which is a totally different kind of energy to introduce into the room.
Even what I would like to see, not just in different rooms, but just like a piece of plywood in between them. Right,
well, that's the kind of thing I had.
Me and you could both be here. We just have a giant piece of plywood that goes to the ceiling all the way around, so there's absolutely no way we can see each other. And like one of those mentalists or stage magicians also there, just to observe it and to ask questions and make sure there's no trickery going on.
Yeah, there's definitely not trickery going on. I mean,
right? I don't think there is either. But I'm just saying, just to.
Sure, for people to be assured of that. But there's definitely not trickery going on, I mean, if there's something that's going on that is, let's say, more that would be in keeping with a materialist model. Okay, let's say that the materialist model is correct. Okay, that there's nothing going on here that is a sense, picking up information outside of the ordinary senses. Okay, if there's something like that that's going on, then it's going to be something more along the lines of the fact that these children do have hyper sensitive senses in general. Okay, their ability to hear is extraordinary, and so they could, they can hear a conversation, somebody that, is at totally other end of the house. Okay. And we know that when we think silently, that we actually still vibrate our vocal cords.
Really?
Yeah. And so one of the things that I've wondered is whether or not it's something along those lines, that their hearing is so extraordinary that they can even pick up the vibration of somebody's vocal cords vibrating when they're thinking. And because, these parents are quite sincere in their, most of the parents, and I've had people contact me from all around the world. I've probably had over 100 people contact me. I haven't had the funding to go and test all of these reports. But when the parents are contacting me, it's not because they're trying to become famous. It's not. They're in shock. They're in shock. A lot of them would never want to have been on the Telepathy Tapes podcast. They would not have wanted the publicity. So the people that Kai wanted to be introduced to were the people who were willing to be filmed. But that doesn't mean that represents all of the individuals that I've been contacted by, over the years. And and some of those individuals, the kid doesn't use a spelling board at all. They're capable of using a pencil and writing. And so, and some of them, and one of them, it goes against this idea that it's just as listening to the sub auditory, vibrations.
Vocal cord vibrations. Well, that doesn't make sense to me, because when I think about telepathy, one of the biggest problems that boils up for me is, as it's probably become obvious to you, my train of thought is all over the place. Like it's hard for me to even think about one thing at once. I'm often thinking about many things at once. Mm-hmm. So like, I mean, and this is common with writers. They'll understand, it's to communicate an idea. It's not just one perfect stream of consciousness into words to communicate something. Usually there's a lot of editorializing a process that people have to go through to refine drafts until you can come up with the most condensed, distilled version of that idea for other people to be able to digest and understand. Like if I was just somehow projecting my raw stream of consciousness to you right now, it would result in massive miscommunication, right? And if somehow that could correlate to vocal cord vibrations, I mean, that would just be just as confusing, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that these autistic individuals say is that they hear all of these different people's thoughts. And so they hear, it's like being in a crowded restaurant.
Yeah.
For them. If you can imagine,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's how they experience it, and so they're having to tune into the individual that they're supposed to be telepathic with, and block the rest of it out, while they're also having to communicate. It's extraordinary what they do, and whatever the mechanism is, it's extraordinary. It's just, I think that, where people get hung up on is like, is it telepathy in the same way that we think of telepathy?
Right.
Are
we perceiving it the right way? We might not be perceiving it the right way. We might not be thinking about it the right way. It might not fit into our framework of how we imagine the world, the physical world, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so one of the things about autistic individuals that made me think that, besides Savant Syndrome, that made me think that they might be the most likely to demonstrate this, was that I looked at, when I wrote my book, The ESP Enigma, what I did was I looked at like who are all of the, where do we find the most reports by people that they experience ESP? Okay, who are these people?
Right.
Okay, and you see a higher incidence of that kind of reporting in people that are artistic and creative. Okay, so the opposite, and you see the least reports in people who are scientific and analytical and logical. Mm-hmm. And then we also have people who have never had anything, that you would call ESP in their waking life, but they've had a dream occasionally that was precognitive, or it was like it contained like an after-death communication. These dreams where somebody has a dream about their, grandfather coming to them, and then that morning they find out that, Grandpa died last night. He died at the same time that I had that dream. There's all kinds of reports of that kind of thing. And then there was a lot of research that was done on dream telepathy, and where you had people who'd be sitting in one room looking at a picture or painting and then trying to send it to somebody who was dreaming. And there'd be a researcher who didn't know what the picture was, who would wake up the dreamer when they could tell that the dreamer had been in REM sleep. And you can tell that because the eyes go back and forth.
Rapid eye movement.
Yeah. And so you wake up the dreamer and just say, what were you just dreaming about? And then they would take that description of what they were dreaming about and compare it with the picture that somebody was sending them. And there was an amazing sort of correspondence between the two. And so I knew that there was something different about the dreaming brain that made it, a state of consciousness where you're in a more receptive mode. And what I kept seeing over and over and over again was the same pattern. And what it was is that and this is oversimplifying what's happening with the hemispheres, but just for simplicity's sake, think of it as the creative and intuitive hemisphere is associated with the right hemisphere, and the analytical and logical and language-based hemisphere is the left hemisphere. And when we're in waking life, our left hemisphere is dominant.
Yes.
And
the
particularly
analytical hemisphere.
I'm sorry?
That's the analytical hemisphere.
Right, yeah. And then in our Western culture, that's also the way that our educational system is set up. It's set up to develop the left hemisphere skills. Everything is, reading, writing, and arithmetic, analytical, logical, right? And it's really de-emphasized the arts and the creative and all of that. Okay, so during the time when the brain is still very plastic and capable of being, shaped into whatever kind of tool we need it for, because it's undergoing all of this capacity for rewiring, depending upon what do we need, what abilities do we need? And just like, as I was saying earlier, like people who are blind, born, congenitally blind, or people who were born with, or quickly within the first couple of years of life lose their ability to speak, there's these, the brain's still rewiring itself to trying to find a workaround for, for whatever it is, so that you can still navigate, this world and get your needs met. And so back to left hemisphere versus right hemisphere, what I realized is that a lot of these savant skills are right hemisphere skills. And the right hemisphere is associated with Gestalt thinking, not this linear verbal thinking. It's associated with, pattern recognition or visual spatial processing. Right. And then in dreaming sleep, the right hemisphere is dominant over the left hemisphere, but also in dreaming sleep, our frontal lobes shut down their activity. And our frontal lobes are what create expectations. And so during dreaming sleep, our dreams can be so magical because we're not the analytical, logical, and sort of setting the expectation and thinking of consequences. All those parts of the brain are shut down, and so it's able to do it's free to access information that gets shut down by people during their waking life, where it's sort of like, well, that can't happen. And so autistic individuals, they're not only are savant skills mainly right hemispheres, but their main deficits are in the left hemisphere. Language, right? The linear things. And so I thought, well, if anybody is going to be able to do this, it's going to be somebody whose brain, when they're in their waking state, is more one of these sort of hybrids, conditions, or either more right hemisphere dominant, or that they're, or they're able to have this kind of, that there's that in hypnosis. What you're trying to do is you're trying to put somebody into kind of more of a hybrid state, or like, that state that you're in just before you wake up and you still can access your dreams, and then they slip away if you don't, it's that state, that kind of twilight kind of state that you're in. And what people try to do in meditation is they try to stay in that state for more than just, a couple of seconds. They're trying to expand that, because when you expand that, you have more access to things that are normally unconscious.
Wow. So what is happening is that that state that you're explaining, that twilight state, that's what's happening when you hear about stories of people being put into like a hypnotic regression to like access buried memories or suppressed memories?
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is you're basically trying to put them into a place where instead of the left, the left hemisphere analytical, logical thing being driving, kind of what we have access to.
Yeah.
You're allowing the unconscious to kind of be, accessed. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you're somehow opening, you're allowing access to like the encrypted part of the hard drive that your consciousness is not allowed to, like when you're waking consciousness.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things.
It's a wild idea to me that I have memories in my brain that I cannot access, that aren't even real, like they don't exist, but they're somehow in there. If I'm in this state, you can somehow pull these things from like my early childhood, maybe some trauma that I experienced that I buried, or just something I just straight up forgot. That idea is just so bonkers to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. But there's, there are people who have, accessed. So here's the thing, though. There's lots of problems with memory in general.
Yes.
Because memory is not. It's not like this video recording.
No.
And over time, it gets modified.
Almost instantly gets modified, right? I think there were studies on this.
Yeah, it gets modified by subsequent events.
Right. And the brain's doing something. What the brain's doing is take it, from what I understand, is the memory has a purpose, and the purpose is to help us get through the world in the future. Like how can we take this and apply this to future situations so it helps us get through helps us evolve.
Yeah, exactly. And so, memory is so imperfect, and so I mean, you have to, when people tell you their memories, you have to realize that. And so then, when people are accessing memories under hypnosis, I mean, that's even another third degree separation away from what might be an accurate memory. I mean, you can't, you can't trust it entirely,
right,
is the point I'm making,
Right.
So, yet at the same time, what's fascinating to me is you mentioned earlier this man who had his temporal lobes removed, and he couldn't lay down new memory. Well, there are people who can't forget a thing to save their life.
Really?
Yes. There was this,
nothing new. They can't forget anything.
They can't forget anything. There was a psychologist. His last name was Luria. And Luria, and he wrote a book on the mnemonist, and it was this man that he met who he couldn't forget anything. I mean, you could say to him, June 12th, 1988, and then they'd tell you what the weather was like, what they had for lunch, everything, just a retention of all these mundane things that most of us never, ever put into long-term memory.
Wow. Is this what it is?
Hyperthymesia.
Hyperthymesia, also known as hyperthymestic syndrome, or highly superior autobiographical memory. Wow. Condition that leads people to be able to remember an abnormally large number of their life experiences in vivid detail. It's extraordinarily rare, with fewer than 100 people in the world being diagnosed with this condition as of 2021. Holy smokes. What does this say about ancient Greek? The authors wrote that they derived the word from the ancient Greek hyper excessive. Wow. Only 100 people in the world? What would lead to have it? Are you born with that, or do you develop that?
Well, it's a good question. So one of my former colleagues from Johns Hopkins, Jason Brandt, who was a neuropsychologist, he contacted me, I don't know, several years ago and told me about this. He had a patient like this, and he was able to do neuroimaging on him. And what was interesting is that he had an excessive amount of white matter around the hippocampus. And so that to me is a clue. And when he told me about that, I said, oh, that's really interesting, because I believe that Einstein had a lot of excessive white matter around his angular gyrus, which is the part of the brain that's associated with calculation, being able to calculate things.
Really?
Yeah. And so
I should have known they would have done a dissection of his brain. I've never thought about that.
Oh yeah. There's an interesting story about his brain, because I forget exactly what it was, but it was like to me, it was like being stored in a jar in somebody's barn in Texas or something. I mean, it was some bizarre thing like that. I don't remember. Don't quote me on any of the details,
right.
but it'd be like hearing that. Okay, it was just like it was one of those things where his brain got pickled, and then somehow it ended up in the custody of somebody, and it wasn't like in this vault at Princeton where you would expect it, right?
Right.
It was in some strange place.
In a giant cylindrical vat.
But anyway, but the point is that when you think about what white matter is, that's the myelination. You've got the gray matter, which are like the neurons, and then the white matter is the isolation. The myelation that causes faster conductivity. So it's like the difference between having a wire that is, insulated and a wire that's not. And so we know that heavily myelinated areas have faster conductivity, and so.
Oh wow!
But another form of white matter are astrocytes, and astrocytes are fascinating. Their name comes from the fact that they're star-shaped, and one of the things that we discovered about the brain, I don't know when this was discovered, maybe 10 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. What we realize is that the synapse when we think of a synapse, we think of two neurons that are in communication with one another, right? So you've got the axon, and you've got the dendritic spine, and so and across that synaptic cleft, there's a neurotransmitter that's sent, okay? And then there's some synapses that are electrical, where there's no neurotransmitter involved at all. You've got a gap junction that's connecting them, okay? So, but then what we now realize is that there's something called a tripartite synapse, which means that the connection between two neurons also has an astrocyte involved, and the astrocyte sends out its own process, and it's monitoring what's going on at the synapse. And so it's like these white cells, which are about 20% of our brain cells, are astrocytes.
And that's the white matter.
They're white. They're part of the white matter.
Okay.
Yeah. So 80% of the brain, neurons are only 10% of the brain. Okay. They're only 10%. And then and so the rest of it are glial cells. And then there's all these different types of glial cells. And one type of glial cell are the astrocytes. And the astrocytes, there's some people who think that the astrocytes might be involved in quantum processes.
Whoa. In this cold weather, I have to work out twice as hard just to break a sweat. And that's why I choose Mando to take care of me while I take care of the workout. And if you order now using my code, you can get 20% off. From your pits to your package to everything in between, Mando controls body odor for 72 hours, which is perfect for long workouts or running from the feds. It's clinical strength, 2 times better than the standard. And after just 12 hours, sweat was reduced by 92%. And it doesn't just mask odor, it prevents it. 100% of study participants experienced all-day odor protection. And that's why I use Mando. My favorite is their new deodorant plus sweat control solid stick. It's absolutely pleasant in demanding situations. I highly recommend the solid stick in bourbon leather. It's absolutely magnificent. Some men mask their BO with sense. Mando men get the job done right. Don't mask it, Mando it. Available in retailers near you, or head on over to shopmando.com, because for a limited time, new customers get 20% off site-wide with our exclusive code. Use code DANNY at shopmando.com for 20% off site-wide plus free shipping. It's linked down below. Now back to the show.
Yeah. What was this guy? We had a guy on the other day who was explaining to us, what was that term? His name's Stuart Hameroff.
Yeah.
You familiar with him?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What is, I can't even think of the word that he studies. He studies this certain part of the
Microtubules.
Brain. Microtubules. That's what it is. He thinks the microtubules have something to do with consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, so this is the thing, is that the way that I'm studying the brain, and this book that I'm writing that's going to be published in the fall, I've been studying the brain the way that somebody is, I'm trying to retro-engineer things, okay? And what I mean by that is I'm looking at the brain and all of these things that people don't talk that much about, okay? People tend to focus so much on the neurons and on the neurotransmitters. Mm-hmm. And that's just a tiny fraction of the brain.
Right.
And so I'm interested in all the rest of it as a system. How does it work? It's like when I was, I did a fellowship. I did 1 year of a fellowship in genetics at the time of the Human Genome Project. And at the time, we were shocked when the results finally came back. We were shocked that there were only 22,000 genes in the human genome. And we were expecting it to be at least 5 times that. And so what we realized is that, here you have this, these are very parallel situations, okay, where you have with genetics, gene coding DNA is only about 10% of the chromosome. And the rest of it was treated like it was just scaffolding, for the important stuff, the gene coding protein,
right?
Protein creating genes. And then we discover, no, it's like, okay, there's not enough differences in the genetics to explain the variability we see. I mean, there's only 1.5% of our genome differs from chimpanzees.
1% of our genome differs from chimpanzees.
1.5%.
1.5%.
Yeah, and we share like half of our genome with like vegetables. It's astounding.
That's wild.
And so what you realize is that, so I think of the genes that code for proteins as being kind of like think of them as like the keys on a player piano, okay, and then all of the rest of it is like plays a role in what sequence of those keys being played,
right?
To make the music, yeah, you've got the keys, but then what controls the sequencing, of how those keys are played? Well, it's the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And that's we're just beginning to, that's going to be a much harder sort of thing to decode, because it's just so much more complicated. Well, similarly with the brain, we've been focusing on the 10%, the neurons,
right?
Because that's where you get the these action potentials.
But Stuart was saying there's like hundreds of thousands of microtubules per neuron or something, right?
It depends upon what neurons you're talking about,
okay.
But there's certainly about 10,000 or so per neuron.
10,000, that sounds about right.
and when you see them in the neuron, it's like they're packed so tightly in there. They're not there as scaffolding. They're not there. I mean, microtubules are in every cell of our body. Okay, they perform multiple different functions, and so they form different organelles within the body. So, like a lot of our sensory cells, like you look at the hair cells that are in the ear, okay, that respond to different frequencies of sound. Those are chock full of microtubules in a very specific array. Similarly, the photoreceptors in the back of our eye, those are also modified cilia, and cilia are microtubules based. Okay, and so similarly, when our cells are dividing into two like cells, mitosis. Similarly, there's an organelle, which means little organ. There's an organelle that is called the spindle apparatus, which is what organizes the chromosomes and makes sure that each cell has the same complementary set of chromosomes. So microtubules are involved during brain development. Microtubules are what are leading the way for the connection to be made between neurons that are in very different parts of the brain. Okay, that microtubules are leading the way there. So the point is that microtubules are fascinating. They're like little superconductors. And they clearly play a huge role in consciousness. And
what can we do to push forward this, or to study the connection between microtubules and consciousness? Like, is there any hypothetical study or research that can be done that maybe isn't funded to study this stuff?
Well, I'm really interested in looking at. I have a model for this whole, and I can't go into all of it today,
Right.
And when my book comes out, then it'll have some of this. Definitely have some of this in there. But I'm really very interested in designing experiments that can answer that question, and working in collaboration with people like Stu Hameroff, and he and I have both been invited to be part of this group of scientists who are going to get together to actually talk about that. There's about 15 of us. Some of us are physicists, some of us are neuroscientists, to really kind of see, brainstorm about
Right.
what kind of experiments can we do,
Right.
So that we can really,
Intellectual salon. That's
yeah. What can we do with what we have here?
Right.
Because as I said, it's a system. It's a system, and that's how I think. I think more like a systems engineer, as opposed to, just looking at one thing and attributing everything to just one thing.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. When Stu was down here, he was explaining to me that he's been looking into some stuff with Alzheimer's, and he was talking about what is the
Neurofibrillary.
No, what is the thing that you scan on pregnant women to see the baby? Ultrasound. He was using ultrasound waves to potentially come up with a treatment for Alzheimer's. And he was explaining something about the ultrasound waves hitting the brain that can somehow like eliminate the plaque that develops in the brain or something like this. And this can help potentially be a treatment for Alzheimer's or different cognitive impairments. It's fascinating stuff. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but.
Well, yeah. So I know that ultrasound is being used. I mean, this is very low voltage ultrasound.
Right.
Is being used for neuromodulation. And that's being done at the University of Arizona by Jay
What is
Sanguinetti.
neuromodulation?
Yeah, well, neuromodulation. It's when you're basically trying to modify the way that neurons behave. You know,
okay.
and you can target a very, very specific area within the brain. You know, you're having to, you know, do like an MRI to get, you know that person's particular anatomy, you know, their brain, and then you can, and you know, in their skull, you know, people have differences in the shape of their skulls and whatnot. So you're having to do all these, you know, measurements to make it very specific for the individual you're doing it for.
Right.
But then what you're doing is you're beaming in, you know, sound waves and very, you know, low voltage, and what you're doing is you're basically getting it to respond to that particular frequency that you're putting in. If you think of the brain as being a generator of frequencies, okay, and if you can get it to if you can get a specific area of the brain to be, you know, if it's receiving that frequency, you're going to be kind of entraining it to that frequency, and then you're looking at what are the effects of that, right?
Right.
You know, and so what you're doing is you're just trying to modify brain functionality by using sound waves as opposed to chemicals. You know, similarly, there are people that are using infrared light therapy for Alzheimer's. You know, and so
for Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and so there you're using light
By just looking at it.
No. This is.
How would you get it in through the skull?
Well, so there's a helmet that you can put on that and you're right that the skull does not.
I've seen the helmets. We actually have one, but it's for hair. Hair growth.
This is. I see. Yeah. No. This is. No. I know that there's somebody who has a helmet. Yeah, I know there's somebody who's developed a helmet that you wear that delivers infrared. It's not ideal because you're gonna the bone of the skull is gonna block it to some extent.
Right.
But what is also being done is a nasal probe.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah, and you know, and that's because you're actually you can get it, you can deliver it to the brain at a place where you don't have this. You have a porous because of the olfactory nerves going through the cribriform plate. You've got holes in the skull basically, and the nucleus basalis minor is the cholinergic-based nucleus that's predominantly what's affected in Alzheimer's, and that lays it, you know, towards the base of the brain.
Oh, interesting.
And so, you know, so you're getting closer to, you know, by going up the nose, you're actually you're pretty close.
Has this
to it.
shown any positive signs, this infrared light therapy for Alzheimer's? Has there been any effective treatments for this? Like, has it worked?
Well, yeah. What I can say is that I first met the people who were doing this kind of work at a Science of Consciousness conference, and that was, gosh, I don't know, at least maybe 10 years ago or so. And I became really excited about it. And I've had a couple of patients who had come to me with, neurodegenerative conditions, cognitive problems. And after doing an assessment of them, I said, would you be willing to try this? Because it's commercially available. Mm-hmm. You can go online and
nasal red light or nasal infrared filter.
V light.
So you can find one, Steve.
VIELIGHT. V light. Mm-hmm. And so I recommended to this patient that she get one, and it did reverse some of her cognitive decline. She was extremely grateful to me for it.
How much are one of these bad boys? So you can find one on Amazon. Oh, look, she's got it up one nostril instead of
you just put it up one nostril.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not a paid
take two.
employee of theirs. I'm not, I didn't come on thinking, so I have no commercial interest in this.
Oh, they're
at all.
$1,800.
Yeah.
I mean, this one's
It's not bad.
Yeah,
But when
17.
you consider the cost to one's quality of life,
Of course, right.
that, and so I know that I.
Will
I've seen-
insurance cover the cost of this?
I can't. I don't know. I think they should, but
I do too.
yeah.
Have you ever heard of Jack Cruz?
Of who?
Jack Cruz,
I'm sure.
neurosurgeon guy, internet guy. He's all over Twitter. He talks about. Anyways, he's like a big proponent of light, like mitochondrial health.
no.
He calls himself a mitochondriac, and he's a big proponent of like red light, sunlight, UV light, all this stuff. And when he was doing surgery, neurosurgery, what he would do was, instead of using those big round LED lights that they usually use for surgeries, he would use red light panels. And when he would, when he'd open up the skull and expose the brain, he was shining red and infrared light on it, and not those big LED white lights, blue lights, because he thinks the blue light is like really toxic for humans. And another thing that he likes to do is give the patient during brain surgery an IV of methylene blue, which is like a dye. It's like a blue gene dye, and it's also used as fish tank cleaner, but allegedly it's good for mitochondrial health. And he also did this thing where he had this 80-something-year-old patient who needed like a crazy invasive spinal surgery. And he did this, and normally he's like, no other neurosurgeon was going to do it. And he came to Jack to ask him to do it, and he was like, I'll do it, but the only way I'm doing it is if I'm going to do this with like red lights and the IV of methylene blue, and your recovery is going to be a little bit unconventional. So what he did was, after the surgery, he wheeled the guy out into the courtyard to recover outside under the sunlight instead of inside under all the blue lights. And apparently the guy the next day walked out of there, when normally it takes patients like multiple days to recover from that kind of an invasive spinal surgery.
Yeah.
Which blew my mind. Another story he told me was that his father-in-law had to get cataract surgery. And before, leading up to the surgery was like planned out months in advance. And the guy like fell off a ladder or something and like injured himself. So Jack said, go stand in front of it. I'm going to give you this red light panel. Sit in front of this red light for 20 minutes, 3 times a day for like the next couple weeks. And he did it to like fix his knee, or I think it was his knee. And he went in to go get his pre-op appointment for his cataract surgery about a month later. And the doctor, the ophthalmologist, was like, what the hell's going on with you? Like, your vision is restored. Like, you don't need cataract surgery anymore. And then Jack asked him, he's like, were you looking at that red light when you were trying to fix your knee for 20 minutes a day, 3 times a day? He's like, yeah. He's like, I never put any eye protection on. And he's like, oh, it must have been the red light and the near infrared light that was in that panel somehow regenerating neurons in your eye. And he believes that was what restored his vision. And the reason he didn't need cataract surgery anymore.
Yeah. Well,
which seems crazy.
Well, it only seems crazy if you don't realize the role of biological light.
Right. Right.
And it was one of those things where, like, Gurwitch, discovered, biophotons 100 years ago.
Fritz Popp was another one of those guys.
Well, he was subsequent, and he was one of the people who then, helped to, validate Gurwich's work. But from over, 100 years ago. And then you had Royal Rife, who had, he developed these microscopes that didn't require light to be used. He had lenses that were configured in a certain way such that he could get magnification and visibility of the whatever he was looking at without having to put in an external source of light. And that revolutionized microscopy because if you're shining light on something, you're not going to see that it has its own light that it radiates.
Right.
And so one of the things he saw was that different species of bacteria emitted different frequencies of light. That like one bacteria.
It's similar to like bioluminescence, but much less, right?
Bioluminescence is something different.
Oh, okay.
That this is actually
It's UV light that the body creates. Is that right? Isn't that right?
we do create UV light.
Right.
Absolutely. And that was like Gurwich's mitogenic rays, which were blue rays, they were, purple bluish rays, Well, when I first saw a picture of the mitogenic rays, I was like, oh my gosh, that is the spindle apparatus. The spindle apparatus has a very, very specific shape to it. And when I realized, well, he only saw these rays during mitosis, which is driven by these microtubules, I said, oh, microtubules must carry light. And so, it's sort of like we have our own kind of fiber optic, system within our bodies, and it makes sense that if you look at cells, the number of interactions that, biochemical interactions that occur per second is like 100,000 per second or something like that. And the only way that you could drive all of those processes would be if it's under the influence of light, traveling at the speed of light.
Right.
And so anyway, I think that if you realize then that, well, where do biophotons in the body, where do they come from? I've read accounts that say they come from DNA. They also come from mitochondria. And, which mitochondria are what provides energy
Right.
for everything. And you need energy to rebuild, to detox, to do all those things. And so the fact that our mitochondria have been poisoned by, chemicals, whether it's glyphosate, which is Roundup, that's in a lot of our food.
And LED lights.
Whatever, yeah. LED, everything that's poisoning our mitochondria, and people being increasingly indoors.
Right. It's like
staring at a computer screen that emits blue light.
Blue light, or phones that emit blue light that are screwing around with your dopamine system.
Yeah, and your sleep-wake cycles.
Your circadian rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is that the idea that something like red light could be helpful makes sense because light is causing some of the problems, and light could be some of the solutions. It's just a different frequency light.
This is what my phone looks like.
Ah, yeah.
I got a red filter on it, so I don't get the blue light, or at least not a ton of it. Yeah, I had one of the things that Jack was describing to me, he's like, with the environments that we've built for ourselves, being indoors underneath these blue lights with all these screens and surrounded by technology and these crazy EMFs, is like, it's similar to a killer whale in a tank at SeaWorld. It's like the same thing is going to happen psychologically, like the Shamu at SeaWorld, the killer whales, its fin goes down, starts getting depressed, has no desire to mate, ends up killing the trainers, going crazy. Like, that's what we're doing to ourselves. We're not meant to be in these environments. We're not evolved to be in these crazy technological environments. And potentially that could be one of the effects of the human mind becoming more left-brained, more analytical, and less creative. This could be, if perhaps this this ability of humans to have telekinesis or telepathic abilities, the parapsychology we call it, if this was something that was innate in humans long ago,
the industrialization and the explosion of technology is definitely going to correlate with the atrophy of that part of the mind.
I think what's happening is that we're actually for decades now, with a high percentage of the population going through the educational system and it being so left hemisphere biased in terms of what we learn, that we have been, our brains have been increasingly more wired towards that sort of logical, analytical way of being. But what's happening now with younger people is that they're more interested in things having a video component. They're less interested in reading and more interested in accessing information in a way that's like a lot more information, per second than what you can get from reading. And so I think that it's rewiring our brains, as a species, towards one that's more balanced towards, right hemisphere and less towards left hemisphere. And so what I would like to see is, here we have AI, which is, language-based learning, right? We have AI doing all of this stuff that's really more left hemisphere skills.
Right.
What I'd like to see is our educational system bringing back the arts and bringing back, a lot of these things where we develop our right hemisphere that is the pattern recognizing, gestalt thinking process and intuition, because we need to be able to discern what is real and what's not, and the problem with language is language can be very, very deceptive. You can
Right.
Language can lead us away from the truth.
Right. Totally.
And so the more we can get back to developing our pure perceptual processes and our intuition and our ability to discern, does that fit in? Does that, how does this fit together?
Right.
As opposed to this more, siloed way of approaching information.
Right. My wife was showing me something she read on some sort of website that was explaining how, I don't know if it was nationwide or if it was only in Florida, but there's like a high number of children in elementary and middle schools who are being pulled out of public school by their parents to do homeschooling. And it's getting so bad that some schools are like debating whether to how much staff they need to cut or do they shut down. But apparently this is like becoming a huge thing. Homeschooling on the rise. So it was in Florida.
Yeah, well, it's happening in a lot of places because, unfortunately, our schools have become all about testing.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where it's become more about memorizing and less about learning how to critically think.
Whoa. Florida sees 46% increase in homeschooling over the past 5 years. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think that the pandemic changed a lot of things because a lot of parents started to see, is this what my kid's doing in school?
Right.
They started realizing that, what kind of education their child is and is not getting. And everyone who's a good parent, that's one of the first things that they care about is how is my kid being educated?
Right.
And and they don't want them to be dependent either. They want them to, there's a certain independence that comes from having the kind of flexibility in thinking that is required going into the future. If all you're having is this sort of rigid way of thinking and memorize this and the measure of success is what's your score on some meaningless test, really. Then that's not really preparing you for the real world. And kids already knew that. kids have not been happy in school. Kids don't enthusiastically go off to school.
No.
The only thing they're enthusiastic about is seeing their friends.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing they get from it is the social interaction aspect of it.
Right. And they still need that. That's critical. And so where I live in Oregon, there are a lot of people who homeschool, and they have these programs that are set up so that parents who do the homeschooling still have a place where they can send their children for the socialization. So they still have a place where they go maybe 3 hours out of the day to get that. The kinds of things that you could, whether it's playing on a team sport or being in a band or whatever it is that
there's a local community sailing center right down the street from here. And when my kid was doing sailing camp during the summer, one of the days they set aside there is for the homeschooling kids. So like there's a bunch of group of homeschool kids, like co-ops, that every day on the certain day of the week, they all come sail. And another day they'll maybe go out and do another thing, go to a museum or something like that. And like they're getting real world experience, like in the real world, like doing real things. And they're not stuck in a room under blue lights all day, staring at a TV. And that's another thing. All the schools are on screens now. They have them all on iPads and computer screens and doing all this digital stuff, which scares me. So I think I might be following suit. Do you think it's possible that back in time, way back thousands of years ago, that early humans had some of these parapsychology abilities like innately, and this is just atrophied over millennia?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
With the development of technology and
Absolutely.
Communication, the written word, and that kind of stuff. I would imagine that even things like the written word and the ability to start writing on scrolls and texts and stuff like that, developing that ability to offload memories probably atrophied our ability to store memory in our brain.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting to think about how with every development of a technology, there's the unintended consequences, right?
Right.
So look at how our smartphones, for example, have, on the one hand, boy, they have sure made a lot of things a lot easier. When it comes to travel, for example. Whether it's the GPS or making arrangements or checking on my flight or any of that stuff. And yet at the same time, our smartphones are also dumbing us down. Right. A lot of people don't know the phone number of really important people in their life because it's always programmed into their phone. Mm-hmm. And and some people, they wouldn't know how to use a map, if they needed to. There are people that they're losing some of these skills such that they're becoming so dependent upon a technology that could be taken out by something like a Carrington event.
Right.
And, which, when the Carrington event happened in 1859, it burned up the telegraph stations, because of the solar flare, look at how, back then, things weren't so electrified. People weren't so dependent upon that. What would happen if we had some kind of event like that today? It would wipe out.
A lot of people would die.
Well,
if we lost electricity for a long period of time. We just had 2 crazy hurricanes here about a year ago, and we lost power. Lots of folks didn't have power for like 2 weeks, and it was like Mad Max. Mm-hmm. Just in this little town, people didn't know what to do. It was wild. It was a completely different way of living, because now you're only focused on you're planning your day around when you're going to run your generator, right? And we need water, we need toilet paper, all the things that we never really think twice about is now what everyone focuses on. What time can I go look for propane for the generator? What time should we go to the grocery store to find water and propane and toilet paper? Those are the 3 things. And it's crazy how it's just resets your mind, resets your daily rhythm of life. I kind of liked it, actually.
Yeah,
in a weird way.
And there's a podcast that's out there. I know that where every episode of it is teaching you, kind of like the old ways, so that that if you didn't have any of this technology, if you were just out in the middle of a forest or whatever, how would you, how would you navigate? How would you find food? How would you this? How would you stay warm? So each one of these technologies, and so similarly, books. Books as a technology, on the one hand, it has increased our ability to acquire information, which is wonderful. The downside has been it's also increased. Well, it's also increased the ability to provide harmful information and disinformation.
Ooh.
Right.
And the internet.
Yeah. It's like
it's too much info.
Yeah.
You don't know what's real and what's not.
Exactly. And so, I thought about this, and it's interesting. I didn't grow up with any religion. My father was a scientist, and he was an atheist. But I became interested in stories from the Bible, and one of the things that there's so much truth in the Bible, but I'm not saying that as somebody who who treats it as necessarily literal.
Right.
That there's a lot of stories that tell you something truthful about about people or about life. That's true for a lot of religion. Whether you're talking about Native American spirituality, you're talking about Hinduism or whatever. There's all these stories that have truth embedded within them. And one of the things I started thinking about, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and how they got kicked out of the garden. Well, what is it that got them kicked out of the garden? It was eating the apple from the tree of knowledge. And I started thinking about that and thinking, this is just my fantasy. But I was thinking,
knowledge is satanic.
It's going from when we changed from knowledge as a pure knowing, pure perception, right. Which is what a lot of indigenous cultures still trust most, to trusting the written word.
Right.
Wow,
that's interesting.
That created the possibility to get us to deviate from truth. We started believing what we read in a book. And so if we read in a book this model of reality that goes against kind of what our own direct experience is. Let's say you had an ESP-like experience. But your books at school tell you that's impossible.
That's what's it called? Pseudoscience.
Yeah, it tells you it's pseudoscience. Then are you going to believe the the telepathic experience that you had? Are you going to believe when you had the message in your head saying, call home, and then you find out your dad just had a heart attack? Are you going to believe that? Or are you going to what if you have those kind of experiences on a regular basis? What are you going to believe? Are you going to believe that experience? Or are you going to believe what you read, where it says, oh, well, that kind of thing's impossible? And then what happens is that we rationalize away our direct experience. We talk ourselves out of it.
Right.
That couldn't have been true. That couldn't have happened.
Right.
Oh, it's blah, 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 blah. And so
that happens to me sometimes on podcasts. I'll do a podcast with somebody and I'll come out feeling a certain way, right? Very strongly about something. And then the podcast will go public and I'll read a bunch of comments about it. I'm like, oh, I was wrong. They must be right. My perception completely gets warped. And that's how I've learned never to read comments.
Yeah. You see how you're influenced away from your direct experience. And so then, and I think about, when people tell me their experience, It's like, who am I to tell them they didn't have that experience? Or it's like, it's, and so that's why, like, I think that, these parents who contact me about their child, they're living with this child. They're experiencing it. It's not just with the, the spelling board or whatever that they experience the telepathy. They're experiencing it in other ways. And so it's like, for me to just say, well, no, it couldn't be that because it says right here, it's pseudoscience.
Right.
Then, the person who's having that experience, they're just going to think, okay, you're not going to believe me because of your training, and they're not going to be convinced by me just saying, well, look right here, it says this. Yeah. You can't talk somebody out of their direct experience when it's very profound. That
Sure.
kind of experience. I mean, for you,
why would you even want to?
Huh?
Why would you even want to talk them out of it?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but so anyway, so, to me, it's like, let's explore. Let's just, so that's enough people's experience. Let's explore what's going on there and try to have an understanding that come out of it, as opposed to just, well, I read that can't happen, therefore it can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really powerful metaphor about Adam and Eve and the apple. I've never heard it described that way. It makes a ton of sense. And what do you make of some of these children talking about biblical characters or talking about the Bible, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because so some of them, like Houston, who's in the Telepathy Tapes. I mean, his mother is, if you read her book, I mean, she was raised a fundamentalist Christian. And so when I first was running into that, I thought, well, that's interesting. But, he's already, coming from a Christian home, so the fact that, I mean, some of these individuals will say, oh, I walk with Jesus, when I go to the hill, I see, I see these, I see God, or they'll say these things, and but if they've had a religious upbringing, you think, well, okay, they've had that upbringing. And then I have other people who were raised in a family that's Hindu, or a family.
Oh, that's interesting. So their religious background sort of bleeds over.
It does, and the same thing is true with near-death experiences, from the standpoint of if you have a near-death experience, so your body literally dies, but then somehow you get revived, and then you come back and you say what you experienced on the other side. If you were raised Christian, or if you have that kind of belief system, then you're more likely to see Jesus or Mary, or someone that's from that religion. And if you're Buddhist, you're more likely to see Buddha. And so so there's some influence of your culture on what the experience is, but that still doesn't tell you what the experience is. And the way that I think of it is, there's the deeper I got into studying consciousness, the more I realized how important archetypes are to the understanding of it. In other words, Jesus and Krishna from Hinduism are both very similar archetypes. Yeah. If you read their life story, and their way of being in the world, very, very similar.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of parallels between different characters, mythological people, mythological characters, and biblical characters across religions and cultures and everything. Even like stories, there's similar stories, like the flood myth.
Right, exactly. And so what I think is that when people encounter this, these archetypes, we put a face onto them that is the face that's familiar to us. But there's a deeper structure to that archetype, It's sort of like, I'm interested in what's the code.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. It's sort of like, there's something that they're responding to, but we just put a face onto it because we need to we need something that we interface with, right? I mean,
so we can process it, right,
yeah,
without going crazy.
Yeah, it's images, just like symbols, are a shortcut for a lot of it's condensed information. Mm-hmm. It's a way of, it's like that saying, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. It's just like there's all that information there, and so if you can experience it as an image, symbols are have so much more conceptually packed into them than, like I could write a book on, some symbols, just that symbol alone in terms of what it represents. So what I think is that our brains are navigating informational fields that are, we live in a sea of information. Okay, think of it as like the quantum vacuum fluctuations. There are all of these waves out there that contain information within them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and our brains are helping us to navigate that. And these waves are, it's light and vibration, right? And all of our sensory systems are picking up different frequencies of light and vibration. Sound is, the microtubules are, in the cilia, in the hair cells, are, they're differentiating different frequencies of vibration, and our eyes are differentiating different frequencies of light. We're only seeing a narrow, the visible spectrum of light, but that's not all the light that exists. Mm-hmm. Similarly, we're only hearing, a fraction of the amount of vibrational sound that's out there.
Right. Our senses aren't able to pick up the others.
And then if you look at, just even the sensation of touch, once again that you're picking up, information that is encoded in vibration. Mm. And so it's all about waveforms. And so our senses are giving us information from that, and then but only a narrow spectrum of it. And so there's all this other information out there, which is what we think of as non-local, okay? Because our sensory system is it's oriented to here and now.
There's a funny theory. Have you ever heard of Joe Rogan's fart hypothesis?
No.
So he has this hypothesis called the fart hypothesis. That is like, imagine how many things are out there floating around that we just don't have the organs to perceive, right? Like someone farts, you have this plume of like disgusting smell, but we have this nose that has evolved over time to detect danger, whether it be like fires or gas leaks or prey coming at us, whatever it is. So we have this extreme sense of smell. We're able to detect this thing. But what other stuff is there that we haven't evolved the sensory organs to perceive, right? Like when a dog is in a house, or a cat can like sense sense something, like even when you're in a room in a house, like the energy, it feels off in here, right? Like something feels off about this location, like where we're at. This room feels spooky. Like maybe like we're just getting a little bit of so-called smell that we can't smell, right? That we don't have the organs to perceive, like some sort of like what you're saying, like an energy or some sort of a weird vibration that we're not evolved to pick up or translate.
Yeah, I mean, our brain, how it works is it works on pattern recognition, right? Whether we're talking about how I recognize your face, and it may be that I could, see you 10 years from now and you've aged a little bit, but, but I'd still recognize your face.
Right.
Or for example, Well, anyway, you get the idea. You know, that, you know, you can hear a piece of music and it's somebody else's take on that song, and you can quickly go, oh, that's, you know, so-and-so song. It's just a new, you know, version of it. So we're picking up patterns. And so but what we can pick up patterns without even, it feels like we're guessing because we don't understand it as the same kind of perceptual process with, you know, we're so visual that like when we recognize a pattern visually, we're more convinced that we experienced it because, you know, that, you know, more of our brain is devoted to vision than any other sense.
Right.
But there's this woman, for example, who she can tell if somebody has Parkinson's disease by smell.
Whoa.
She's like 100% accurate.
One woman.
Yeah. She's a Scottish woman.
She's still alive?
Yeah. Yeah. And she, yeah, if you look, he's on it, right? Yeah. She can tell if somebody has Parkinson's disease by smell. And so what scientists think is that there must be some, you know, chemical that's in the,
Woman who can smell Parkinson's helps scientists develop tests. Scientists drew on 72-year-old Scott's rare condition to help identify people with neurological conditions. Scientists have harnessed the power of a woman's hypersensitive sense of smell to develop a test to determine whether people have Parkinson's disease. Whoa.
Yeah.
She noticed that her late husband developed a different odor when he was 33 to 12 years before he was, when he was 33, 12 years before he was diagnosed with the disease, which leads to part of the brain become progressively damaged over many years. Wow. And so I assume they tested this on lots of people.
Yeah, they tested this on lots of people, and she also diagnosed somebody years, besides her husband, somebody else years before he developed the condition. And so the point is that if you asked her how she was doing that, she, you know, I mean, she just does. Okay,
right.
Just like a mother of a newborn, okay, you know, an infant.
Mm-hmm.
There was this study that was done, you know, decades ago, where they took, you know, their little nighties, you know, little night T-shirts, you know, that you put on a baby, you know. They took those from like 10 babies, and then they gave them to mothers and said, just smell this and tell us which one belongs to your baby. And the women were able to match it.
Wow.
And yet,
that's
you
so
know,
crazy.
And so even though you're not thinking about it, there's a pattern there. Okay, there's there's all of these different chemicals, I'm sure, that go into your particular baby's smell. That you just got this pattern right, and you're not having to think about it, and it even feels like you're guessing, but you're accurate. And so we've, you know, similarly discovered that people can detect as little as 1 photon of light, but you don't see the light. Okay, it's below. It's not enough density of light for you to actually visually see it. But if you say to people, did the light flash just then or not? You know, they're very accurate in being able to detect. That's a form of detection. To just, you know, it's just like, as I said, it feels like you're guessing.
Right.
You know, similarly, there's a condition called blind sight, this is not mind sight. You know, blind sight is a condition in which people, their visual cortex is damaged, and they're blind because that part of their brain isn't working. But if you put something in front of them, like a picture of a circle or, you know, or a cross or whatever, they could tell you if it's a circle or a cross. It feels to them like they're guessing.
Wow.
But the information is still getting into their eyes and still getting into other parts of their brain that can do a rudimentary form of, you know, vision, even though they're not having the conscious experience of vision. So the point I'm getting at is that there's a lot of things that can be below our threshold of awareness that gives us information, and I think that's pertinent to this whole question of
to your smell, to the thing you said about smell. I had a woman on here describe to me how there was a study that showed how women, there's a pheromone or some sort of a smell that attracts women to men. Mm-hmm. Something about the pheromone or whatever the smell is. I forget the word. That there's a specific word she used that the men emit. It's a subconscious thing that attracts the woman to the man, and it's all based on immune systems. So the smell of the man means his immune system matches hers, which means it fills in the gaps where hers lacks for procreation. So if they were to create a baby, that baby would have a very robust, strong immune system for evolution, which blew my mind.
I think it was that if he smells good to her, then that is true.
Yeah, they did this study with like T-shirts of men, and they let the women smell it. And which one is more attractive to you?
That's and smell. Smell is the only sense that bypasses the thalamus. That doesn't. Let me say this: all of the senses go to the thalamus, which is like our relay center. And it's where we have sensory gating. Okay, is mainly associated with the thalamus, although. But smell goes right to the limbic system, and the limbic system is involved in things like memory, and emotion, okay, and so that's one of the reasons why smell of all the senses can be the most evocative of emotions and memories for us, and so. One of the things
is weird how that happens.
Yeah, and I remember hearing about this study that was done a long time ago that relates to what you're talking about, which was that there is this, based on smell, that there is more of an attraction to mating with someone who is not your relative.
Right. Exactly.
It's a way of reducing inbreeding by using the sense that is the most associated with these raw emotions, and smell plays a huge role. And it's a lot of the the perfume industry. Some of the perfumes, actually would use pheromones.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because why does a woman wear
males
perfume?
With strong immune systems just bottle their scent.
Well, there's pheromones that a woman emits that also, attracts a man, and they've got kind of more of a musky kind of, the ones that use pheromones have more of a musky smell. But at the same time, we also live in a society that has become kind of anti-olfaction, other than smelling food cooking or something like that. But we've made human smells something that's dirty and undesirable. And
every morning when I'm laying in bed half asleep, I wake up to my wife sniffing me like a dog. She's like She says if she could bottle my scent, she would.
Oh my goodness! All right. Wow. Well, there you go.
Very strong scent attraction there.
Oh wow! Well, then she's
really weird.
Well, you have no worries. She'll never cheat on you.
It's funny. It's funny, but it like when you hear these stories, it's like it does make sense, and it makes you wonder like how human beings are going to evolve now that we're becoming so separated by technology. People aren't going out anymore. They aren't going out to bars and clubs and parties and social events as much. People are working behind computer screens, having Zoom meetings and swiping on apps to find their mates. It's very weird.
I think that what we're going to see is more and more of this sort of divide that occurs where you have people that go that route that are just like, they just love technology. They just love living in the artificial world. Okay. And they just, there are people who are, hacking their bodies, just, with trying to, I mean, you've seen some of these things, haven't you? People that are, engaged in biohacking, where they're even, they're themselves, inserting technology into their body, and then there are people who want to, develop chips, to insert into people, in people's brains, and
transhumanists.
Transhumanists. And so there's people that for whom that's an attractive way of being. And then there are people for whom it's like they're really they're hungering for a more natural kind of existence, and they're going to want to be meeting in person again, and they're and the way I see it is, if you're really, it depends upon what your orientation is, and like one of them is more heart-centered. To me, it's when you're with people, you feel things in a way that's different than when you're interacting with them on the screen. The screen makes it more
podcasts in person.
The screen makes it more of a mental process, whereas
you miss little cues too, like little subconscious cues.
Absolutely. You don't get a real sense for the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so the point I'm getting at is that just like there's this trend towards more and more parents leaving public education and going into homeschooling, there's more and more people that are wanting to go and get away from the technology. They're wanting the vacations out in nature. They're wanting to see people in person. I mean, and so I think that we're really going to see people that go these two different ways. Okay, and there are the people also who realize they need to develop these practical skills because technology can be taken away like that.
Right.
And so it's going to be very interesting to see how things evolve. But I also see more and more people interested in developing their own innate abilities, their own innate intuition, their own, these abilities that I think our ancestors had developed to a very high degree. That's how they survived. Mm-hmm. A lot of these indigenous cultures still have these abilities,
which still exist, by the way. They're still roaming around different parts of the earth in the Amazon rainforest, Sentinel Island. That's crazy. It's crazy that we can live in this technological world that has autonomous cars and drones delivering your Amazon groceries. At the same time, there's people running around naked in the rainforest shooting 7-foot arrows at anyone who tries to get close to them.
Yeah, and and one of the things that I wonder about, when you hear of things like, the what's the name of that device, the Antikythera or whatever?
Oh yeah, yep, the device they found in that ship.
Yeah, which was a very, very sophisticated, It
was like an astronomical alignments. It could do. Yeah, it looked like gears.
Yes,
inside of a clock.
Yeah.
There it is. Antikythera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2,000-year-old device, okay, that really showed that they understood the astronomy, and could, predict when eclipses would occur and whatnot. Well, what I suspect is that human beings were far more technologically advanced thousands of years ago than we realize, and that a lot of that knowledge has been lost. And it's possible that, who knows? It's possible that they had some of this technology that got destroyed, like in a Carrington type event long ago, or a flood, or getting hit by a meteor, or something, such that only the people who knew how to survive in the forest,
right,
made it. And so then we started all over again, okay, and then eventually we rediscover, similar technology or variations on it, and then we've worked our way up to, technological advances that increasingly people become dependent upon, that if some big event happens, it's going to be the people who know how to survive.
Yes.
Because the Earth will, look at what happened with like Mount St. Helens when, the volcano erupted and it, destroyed everything in its path. But within 10, 15 years, you already have plants coming back and animals are starting to come back. And, nature will find a way. But it's going to be in pockets, where people already know, have the diversity, the biodiversity, and already know how to live within that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't make sense how, some of there's ancient structures all around the world that have like crazy alignments and precision and stuff that like we can't compute with our technology today. It seems like they were certainly on a different trajectory technologically than we are. And we're trying to look at it through our lens and come up with theories on what the ancient world was through our lens. But I think you're right. I think the reality of it is there was something else going on that we probably can't understand. I don't think it was electricity and combustion and all these types of things that they were using. I think it's probably something that along the lines of, what is going on with these children and having some sort of knowledge that is not able to be put into language.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what they had? Because when we look at like some of these ancient cultures, like the megalithic cultures, I mean, we still don't understand today how they built those, and it makes sense though that those structures survived when you consider how massive they are, and et cetera, but that doesn't mean that their whole culture was like that. That's the totality of what they had. I mean, they could have had all kinds of other things that didn't survive.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Going back to what you're talking about with the sensory stuff, have you ever heard of the filter hypothesis, where it's the idea that our senses, our smell, our touch, our vision are all just filters to help us get through the world and to help us evolve. And essentially what's really out there is way more. Like there's certain scientists, brain scientists that I've talked to that do study with like extended state DMT, where they put people on an IV of DMT so they can sort of like map the DMT realm, whatever that is. And they believe that whatever is happening there is like melting away these filters that we have, our sensory, our vision and our smell and all that, and exposing us to more of what could be really, really there. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, the idea of the brain operating as a filter is, that's been around for quite a while. I mean, decades, that hypothesis. And we know that our sensory system, only picks up, information within a really narrow spectrum, whether you're talking about sound or light. And what happens with DMT is it does change the sensory gating, that's going on, okay? And it does so in a way that is so similar to what these autistic individuals I work with describe as their day-to-day reality. In other words, people who do ayahuasca, they describe having synesthesia.
Right.
Well, all of these autistic individuals have synesthesia.
Really?
Yeah, and in fact, they tend to have more than one form of synesthesia. They see auras around people and animals, and they see colors around letters. They hear sounds associated with colors. They, all of these different things are blended together for them. So it's I think of it as being almost like a kaleidoscope world.
Right.
And then another thing they share in common with people who do ayahuasca is that there's a mind-body disconnect. They don't feel totally within their body. And
Right.
And so so that's another similarity. And then a lot of people, when they do, psychedelics like, psilocybin or ayahuasca, they'll experience telepathy as well.
Yep.
And so, and then we know that the brain makes, DMT.
Mm-hmm.
It's an endogenous neurotransmitter.
The lungs as well.
Yeah, it's in, just like, cannabinoids, or, we have endogenous cannabinoids and endogenous opiates. And, so, we have all, the reason why these synthetic things can can work on us is because they're mimicking something that's a natural compound. And so one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is, looking at these endogenous DMT-like compounds in autistic individuals, to see if there's something different about that system in them, because what they describe is so similar.
Yeah, I think Rick Strassman was explaining to us how, no, it wasn't Rick Strassman. It was the gentleman who did the study on kratom.
Chris McCurdy.
Chris McCurdy. Yes, he's a scientist based in northern Florida, I think Tallahassee. He is working on a study trying to find the correlation between people with schizophrenia and high levels of endogenous DMT. He's studying a certain enzyme that regulates the production of endogenous DMT, and he thinks that the people that suffer from high level schizophrenia could potentially be lacking in that enzyme. So they would have too much endogenous DMT, which could be correlating to that stuff, which is wild.
But it's quite possible. I mean, there was a study that was done looking at autistic individuals and people with schizophrenia, finding more of this compound that is DMT-like in their urine, for both of them compared to controls.
Yeah.
And so I'm that's one of the things I'm really, really interested in, because it's like looking at that and then looking at what kind of experiences these individuals have, documenting that, and I'm interested in how much of it is can be validated. Mm-hmm. Bufotenin is, has been found in both autistic individuals and people with schizophrenia. And so I'm interested in, because, what we as psychiatrists are trained is, like, when people say that they have certain experiences, we're trained to say, oh, those are hallucinations, and then treat it as though it's just, and therefore it's imaginary, and therefore there's no truth to it. Well, but when you have people that take purposely, shamans who purposely take these psychedelics to get information, when they do ayahuasca in the jungle, the plants tell them, oh, this is what I'm good for. This is my medicinal properties.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard stories like that, but the point is that, so that information is somehow contained within, where's that information? It's contained somewhere within this
nature.
Within nature.
Yeah.
And so, and people have ingested substances to access that information. Well, these autistic individuals, already just something different about them biologically enables them to access information that we would not have thought of them as having access to. So that's kind of the lens through which I'm looking at all of this, and rather than, getting caught up in, this whole, controversy about, what's going on with these particular individuals. I'm trying to I'm looking at it from a a high perspective of like why is the null hypothesis that like can we disprove ESP why is the burden on those of us who are researching it to prove it's real? People haven't proved that it's not real. Right. That's how science evolves, is by having a null hypothesis that that's what you need to disprove, and it's harder to disprove the materialist model the way that they set it up. If you see what I'm saying, it's harder
to disprove the materialist model
because it's like how do you. Like, to me, there's already enough evidence out there that it should have already flipped already, where it's like, well, prove that this stuff isn't real. They don't have a model that explains anything, and how can and what they're wanting is a burden of proof. They set the bar so high, right?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
they set it so high that it's just like, and then and this is one of the complaints a lot of parapsychologists have, is that every time they keep moving the bar, because if it's in your mindset that this stuff is just impossible, you can always come up with other conditions that you want to impose on this, and it's just like, but what about all this evidence? What about all these experiences people have had across time, across cultures? Yeah. It's like that saying, I think it was William James who said, to prove that all crows aren't black, all you need to find is one white crow. But instead, it's like we're being asked to, find, a lot of white crows,
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's like if there is an exception, then something's wrong with that rule as an absolute rule.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense. What are you interested in doing as far as like pushing the experimentation of this forward in the future, or like what sort of ambitions do you have to study this further?
Well, with the I have a lot of ambitions about doing this. So one of the things I'm doing is looking at things like DMT and bufotenin, to look at that whole system, and then and try to understand it better, okay, and see if I can correlate that with, like, are the ones who are the autistic individuals who are highly psychic, is it that they have more DMT-like compounds, in their system, okay? So that's one type of research that I'm doing.
And also, sorry to interrupt real quick, is it only the autistic, highly autistic people that are telepathic like that, or are there any non-autistic people that are like this?
There are people who are... there are people who aren't autistic that have these abilities. It's just that the ones who are autistic are the ones who have it to the highest degree. Okay. Another thing I'm interested in studying, though, is these other abilities they have. Like, some of them are reportedly highly precognitive. That they're, all of these anecdotal stories. If you listen to the Telepathy Tapes, you'll hear of some of them on that. There's this one young woman I'm working with. She's 19, and she had, in her mind's eye, she saw her father getting into an accident where he slipped on ice, broke his hip, and ended up in a hospital. And she told her mother about it, her mother and father about it, and they were living in Arizona at the time, and and there's not a lot of ice in Arizona. But then he went on a business trip 6 weeks later and slipped on ice and broke his hip and ended up in the hospital. And
a lot of precognitive stories like that.
Yeah. So what I want to do is study precognition, and so we have that capacity to do that. It's just like she can tell me, whenever she gets, those kind of visions, and then we have that recorded. We have a timestamp. This is when the mother sent me the email telling me about that, for example. Okay. And then we just see, they have a hard time telling you when exactly something's going to happen, but then just see how does that evolve, so that it's documented and it's not just I'm hearing the whole anecdote and the, as something that happened in the past, but actually ongoing, do that kind of research. The same young woman who's doing that, I mean, she's working as with police as a psychic detective to find missing children.
Oh, wow.
So I'm very interested in how that plays out. Okay, and once again, having documentation. I can contact the police department or whoever it is that she was working with and say, okay, tell me, and you'll see the documentation for it. Looking at things like that. Another thing I'm interested in is many of these children, reportedly, see dead people, and I've only once asked one of them, would you do a reading on me? And it was when I was in a Zoom call with this mother and this son, and the mother mentioned that her son, does mediumship readings for friends of hers. And I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, and he's really got people, amazed, and it's been really helpful for them. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, well, could you do a reading on me? And this is literally within the first half an hour of meeting him on a Zoom call.
How old is he?
Oh, he's like maybe 20, 21.
Okay.
And he said, sure, And then I said, okay, who do you see? And he says, well, there's so many that it's a little confusing. He says, this one woman tells me she's your half aunt. Well, my father had a half sister. And he described her, and I thought, well, that's interesting, And then he said he saw my grandfather by marriage, and his name was Harold. And my father's stepfather's name was Harold. And so I was like, wow, that was two highly specific statements, both of which were very accurate. And so once again, it makes me go, okay, well, that's something that, I would love to do research on that as well. So it's not just the telepathy. One of the problems with the telepathy is so many of them, they need to use the letterboard to communicate.
Right.
And then that creates all this suspicion, because it's the letterboard. But this boy's mother didn't know anything about me, certainly wouldn't have known about any of my dead family members. And so it doesn't matter if they're using a spelling board. They're just they're a unit together. It doesn't matter if you're looking at precognition either, because neither of them should know the answers to these things. And so I'm actually, more interested in moving beyond just the telepathy because of the challenge. I've already seen, really strong demonstration of that with the kind of setup that I could get, and short of being able to get them in separate rooms, which I would love to see. But in the meantime, I'm not going to be, that's one of the things I was waiting around for since I started doing this research, is to try to get that kind of separation. But now there's all of these other things that have been reported that are just as interesting, if not more so.
Yeah. Yeah, I would really love to see one of those experiments done with a stage magician there to see, because it's the stage magicians and the mentalists are the ones who are the biggest skeptics of this stuff, and they all say they can explain it away and they can do this stuff themselves too, which is conflicting. So I really would love to see that interaction there and to see if they can. Yeah,
well, the people who do like mediumship, I'm on the scientific advisory board of the Forever Family Foundation, which is one of the places where they certify mediums. They do rigorous research. They have very high, criteria for whether or not they'd certify somebody as a medium.
Wow.
And so I know, the way you would set that up. And so, that's one of the things that I want to do. But I know that one of the ways in which somebody who's like a professional psychic or medium that goes out there, they do what's called cold reading, which is like they'll say something like, "Oh, there's somebody here who has, a lost loved one whose name starts with an M, and then which
they're searching.
They're searching,
Yeah.
and of course you're going to find somebody in the audience who lost somebody named Mike.
Right.
The odds are
That's the problem. That's one of the biggest problems with this stuff is there's charlatans.
That's right.
Everywhere.
That's right. And so that's a cold reading, which, you can, I think I could probably do a cold reading, so I don't give that a lot of credibility, I have a pretty good ability to read people, but I wouldn't call it psychic, I just know how to read
Right.
information that, is on people's faces,
trained.
et cetera. Yeah, that's what I've done for a profession.
You're a black belt human reader.
Literally wearing a black belt. But this boy, when he did that reading on me, there was nothing that he did that was anything like a cold reading.
Right. He got straight to the point.
He just went straight to it. He just
That's
went straight to
wild.
it. Your half aunt is here, and someone named Harold, who's your grandfather by marriage.
And this kid has no developmental issues like autism or
No,
anything like this?
he's autistic.
Oh, he's autistic. Okay.
He's autistic. That's what I'm saying. His mother and he were using the spelling board, but it's not. You can't accuse them of colluding together with some kind of code between them, which is what some people accuse them. When neither of them knew me from Adam, and it's not public knowledge. These relatives of mine.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even know I didn't even know my father had a half sister until like 25 years ago.
Wow.
Because my father had cut off his relationship with his father after his father remarried. So I didn't even know that branch of the family had existed. But when my father, when I was doing genealogy, that's when I found out about it.
Right.
And by the time I found out about it, she had already died from cancer. So anyway, so it's not something that's out there in the public record, and so that's, and to me, in a way, that's a more interesting question, because then I can come up with ways of explaining. I can come up with ways of explaining this sort of telepathy thing, even if I had them in separate rooms in the same house, as I said, because if these kids have such super hearing that they can even hear subvocalizations that a microphone doesn't pick up, then, even having them, separated like that, it's not going to eliminate that as a possibility.
Sure.
But mediumship, and then
Wow.
and that suggests something about the nature of, our existence. Do we survive after? Yeah, do we survive in some form after we, or we drop our bodies? And that to me is a more interesting question.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest questions. What happens when we die? Is there a God, and who built the pyramids?
Right. And then some more research that I'm involved with is looking at their ability to influence random number generators.
Wild stuff. Diane, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This has been an exhilarating 3 hours for me.
Has it been 3 hours?
Yes, it has.
Wow.
Time flies when you're having fun. Tell people where they can find your work online, your books, all that fun stuff.
Okay, great. Yeah. So my personal website is Dr. Diane Hennacy, HENNACY.com. And they can sign up for my newsletter. That's the best way to be in contact with me. There we are. And And then I now have a nonprofit, so 501(c)(3) institute for doing this research that I've been talking about, and that's HennacyInstitute.org. And we're almost done with the website. By the time you do this podcast, it should be up and running. And
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll link all that stuff below. And I can't thank you enough for coming down here. I really had fun.
Yeah, thank you. I did too.
All right. Good night, folks.